Robert Kennedy Jr. just made a major splash on the national stage with his declaration about his uncle's assassination. But we have new polling numbers back about the Democrat primary, and it looks like he's making an even bigger splash on the national political stage. But recall from previous polling that even though only 39% of national likely voters want to see Biden run again in 2024, 62% of Democrats do want to see him run. But 62% of Democrats also want to see him have a primary challenge. With that as an intro, here's how Kennedy does in a three-way primary matchup against Joe Biden and Marianne Williamson. Now, these are the numbers for all likely voters, not the sum total of Democrat primary voters, but it gives you a pretty important look at the relative power of each candidate's support at an overall level. And surprise, surprise, Biden and Kennedy are essentially tied, and Marianne Williamson shows up on the map as well, which is pretty impressive considering, as you'll see later, her much lower levels of name recognition. Now, these are all Democrat candidates, which is a pretty artificial setup, and that's why Not Sure and some other candidate responses are a combined 23%. But perhaps because of how different Kennedy and Biden's platforms are, I'm actually incredibly surprised how low that number is. Here's a flashback to when we asked right after Nikki Haley's announcement, and she did pretty well on a national stage too. But like Kennedy, a lot of that was driven by cross-party appeal, just not to the same degree. Kennedy does 10 points better than Haley among all likely voters, has much more cross-party appeal, but also, as you'll see, does a bit better with voters of her own party. Here are the party numbers for the Democrat matchup, and Biden beats Kennedy among Democrats 62% to 19%. There's that 62% of Democrat number, the same number that just a few weeks ago told us they want to see Biden run again for president. Kennedy's numbers here are not bad for someone who just threw their hat into the ring. Like I said, Haley did 15% among Republicans after her announcement, and DeSantis, the last time we asked, was at 25% among Republicans. But gauging the other pollsters I follow, I suspect those numbers would be lower today if we tested it again. But here's the kicker. 50% of Republicans support Kennedy in this run, which is impressive and a bit of a paradox. I think it's probably driven at least somewhat by how important Republicans seem to think the issue of vaccine safety is. Kennedy edges Biden by 4 points among independents, and Williamson actually doubles her support here over what she was doing with Democrats. Now, this one stood out to me like a sore thumb. Here's the same question by political ideology. Robert Kennedy, who I think many would describe as a classical liberal, loses handily to Biden among self-identified liberals, and he beats Biden by 19 points among self-identified conservatives. Biden wins among moderates as well, but I've noticed that the word moderate is really just becoming a term that liberals like to call themselves, and liberalism is really becoming more about statism. Post your thoughts in the comments on YouTube. Now, let's take a step back. How good are these numbers? RFK Jr. is doing pretty well on a national stage, and we'll get to his favorability numbers next. But the Democrat primary challenge is going to be a tougher road to hoe, especially against an incumbent candidate that theoretically has the backing of his party. But here are Kennedy's favorability numbers, and there's a lot to talk about. He has a 54% favorability rating among all voters, though only 19% view him very favorably. 31% say not favorable, and he has only a 15% not sure rating, which is decently low, about comparable to how Democrats rate some of their leaders in D.C. But most importantly, this is 8 points higher than the last time we tested Biden, barely more than a week ago, and almost as high as Trump is currently doing on a national stage. Kennedy does best with younger voters, perhaps because they're more likely to consume alternative news, and perhaps because they're just overall more favorable. He also does better with Black and Hispanic voters, with a favorability rating of 59% and 61% respectively. But here are the party numbers, and Kennedy is actually doing best with Republicans, viewed 9 points more favorably than among Democrats. His Democrat favorability rating is 52%, which sounds low, and it is. Nowhere near how Trump is viewed among Republicans, and even coming in below how many of the Democrat DC leaders are viewed. And most importantly, Joe Biden's favorability among Democrats was 82% the last time we tested it. Now, the good news for Kennedy is that 15% of Democrats still say they aren't sure about him. But some of that has to be driven by how diametrically opposed some parts of Kennedy's platform are to the modern Democrat orthodoxy. I have no idea how it's going to play out, but I have a feeling it's going to be epic. Here are Marianne Williamson's favorability ratings, and the most that can be said here is that a lot of people don't know who she is. The party numbers are probably more useful to look at here. She has a 33% favorability rating among her own party, but an incredible 34% of them don't know who she is, even though she's a declared Democrat presidential contender. Even without the not sures, these numbers aren't great. With them removed, her rating is 50%, whereas among Democrats, Kennedy's rating is 62% corrected for not sures. Among independents, 28% have a favorable opinion of Williamson, but after you correct for the 38% not sures, it only gets up to 45%, which is 11 points worse than Kennedy does among independents, also corrected for not sures. But here's the really big news. If Donald Trump wins the Republican presidential nomination and chooses Robert Kennedy Jr. as his vice presidential running mate against Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who would you vote for? A Trump-Kennedy ticket ties a Biden-Harris ticket, which is an incredible result, again, considering that Kennedy is a Democrat. There are only 12 points of other voters up in the air. I'll link a video at the end on YouTube that gets into some other 2024 rematches in more detail, but as a benchmark, here's how Trump does by himself against Biden. A solid 7-point win. Here's how Trump does with DeSantis on the ticket. 1 point higher margin, and overall 3 points more of the electorate. And here's how Trump does with Carrie Lake on the ticket. Still a 5-point win over Biden. Again, back to today, with the hypothetical Trump-Kennedy and Biden matchup, and a few caveats. One, this is from a different sample than the other matchups. It has to be said. Also, matchups this far out aren't definitive, and the way it should be perceived is that if this played out, it looks like Trump-Kennedy would have a pretty solid chance. Though he's far from Trump's best vice presidential pick, at least today and based only on polling. My theory is that what voters really want is more of the Trump platform without a running mate that's as edgy as Trump. At least somebody that's perceived to be more safe. Here are the party numbers, and there's a lot to talk about here. Each ticket captures the same 72% of their party votes, which isn't much. Trump captured 83% of the Republican vote by himself, and Biden captured 77% of the Democrat vote in that other poll. Kennedy helps Trump pick up 4 points more Democrat voters, but he makes Trump lose 5 points of Republican support to Biden. Again, with the caveat that this was a separate poll. But the big one is the independent vote. In our other poll, Trump beat Biden 49-34 among independents, and here he loses 41-44. That's a pretty massive swing, and it may be partly to do with the makeup of independents in the poll. Perhaps more ideologically liberal, perhaps more third-party types. Polling usually does overemphasize third-party support, but it's a real signal, and I have no idea what's driving it. It looks like Kennedy makes Trump lose independents, and DeSantis helps Trump win more independents, which is completely counterintuitive to what I would have thought. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, as well as any ideas about how to further isolate that signal. Now, there are at least two really huge things happening in political circles right now. One is that the 2024 race is starting to shape up in some really interesting ways. And the other is that investigations into both Biden and Trump are accelerating. If you don't want to miss public opinion news on these topics, please follow us on Twitter, subscribe on YouTube or Rumble, and sign up for a free daily newsletter at RasmussenReports.com. It'll make sure that you don't miss our new results when they drop, like the results for these two questions here, which we're publishing on Thursday. Don't forget to like the video, and thanks for watching.